As a society, two-sport athletes fascinate us. They are polymaths, Renaissance men. Some part of us might be a little jealous, as if God allocated them too many skill points on the character creation screen. After all, most people aren't elite-level brilliant at even one thing, let alone good enough at two to do them at the upper echelon of that discipline. Certainly, the two examples that stand out for people my age are Bo Jackson and Deion Sanders, both electrifyingly brilliant in two different sports. We find such multifaceted brilliance captivating, as we did when Brock Lesnar became a champion in the UFC, to put the phenomenon in terms more adjacent to wrestling. It can be just as fascinating when somebody brilliant in one discipline attempts to master another and fails, as in the case of Michael Jordan's baseball career, or CM Punk's attempt at replicating Lesnar's path. All that said, welcome to Duality, the first in a series of videos about professional wrestling's two-sport athletes. On this inaugural episode, we are investigating a monster. A terrifying giant who was absurdly agile for his size. A highly underrated video game character. A hulking beast of a man who thrashed the Ultimate Warrior the first time they met. His senton was lethal to the point that it sent multiple opponents out on stretchers. Of course, we are describing Earthquake. In life, John Tenta was none of those things. 20 years before John from West Virginia was pulled out of the crowd on WWF television by Dino Bravo to attack the Ultimate Warrior, John Tenta began wrestling at the age of 6. His mother looked out the window to see him lifting a picnic table over his head, trying to get muscles, so he said. In school, he'd earn a Canadian Junior Championship and place very highly in the World Junior Championships. These accomplishments and others earned Tenta a scholarship to Louisiana State, where he wrestled, played rugby, and football. While at Louisiana State, he generally remained the largest man in every room. Returning home after college, the future Earthquake caught the eye of a former sumo Yokozuna, who was vacationing in Canada at the time. The Yokozuna found him to be an impressive athlete, whose ability seemed well suited to the world of sumo. And so, in October 1985, at 22 years old, John Tenta began his sumo career. He became a rikishi, which in fact just means sumo wrestler, with apologies to Salofa Fatu. Age 22 is about 7 years later than most rikishi start their career. He had some catching up to do. As CM Punk discovered, it's extraordinarily difficult to get a late start in any combat discipline and then become even passable at it, let alone elite. You've lost time that you simply cannot get back, and you're forever playing catch-up. You are not supposed to be able to start 7 years late and still become great. At least, that's how it's supposed to work. To put into perspective how good John Tenta could have been in sumo wrestling, a little context is required. With apologies to Rodney Anuai, the word Yokozuna refers to absolutely the highest rank you can attain in sumo. They are the grandmasters, the black belts, the kings of the sport. They are some of the biggest stars in Japanese athletics, and their behavior and lifestyle is highly scrutinized by the Japanese media. Since the 17th century, there have been 78 of these men. I'm going to say that part one more time, it bears repeating. Since the 17th century, in 400 some odd years, there have been 78 Yokozunas. And that number includes a few who are probably at least partially mythical. There are presently 2 men active who have earned this hallowed title, Hosho Ryu and Onosato. But let's take the career of one who just retired, Terunofuji Haruo. In Terunofuji's rookie year, as is the course for a rikishi, he fought in the 3 lower tournaments in sumo, called Jonokachi, Jonidan, and Sandan. It's more complex than this, but just in brief, you fight through these 3 divisions to get to Makushita, where you are on the cusp of becoming a pro. Makushita is AAA baseball, the NBA Summer League. It's the rung just before you've made it to the dance. Got all that? Good. Back to Terunofuji Haruo. In his rookie year in 2011, he went 5-2 in Jonokachi, 6-1 in Jonidan, and 7-0 in Sandan. So what did John Tenta do compared to that guy? Well, in his rookie year, Tenta fought in those exact same 3 tournaments. In Jonokachi, he went 7-0. In Jonidan, he went 7-0. In Sandan, he went 7-0. Undefeated in his first 3 sumo tournaments. You're probably wondering how often that happens. Besides John Tenta, 5 other guys have ever done it. 5 other guys. Ever. While he was on the rise in the sumo world, Tenta's popularity in Japan exploded. It was rare for a white man to be a rikishi in the mid-80s, and his talent was rarer still. He earned a variety of wonderful names in his brief career. Kodotenta Toshikatsu, Tenta the Harp, Kodotenzan Toshimitsu, Heavenly Mountain Harp, and finally, the Canadian Comet. But just as quickly as he exploded onto the sumo scene, he was gone. He debuted in November 1985 and he was done in the summer of the next year. The sumo lifestyle is extraordinarily hard, and Tenta frankly got sick of it. The schedule and the toll on one's body is simply brutal. So he was living a difficult life of no rest and considerable wear and tear on his enormous frame, and to top that off, his stablemates began to resent him for his popularity. Even still, he could have ended up doing all this for next to no financial reward, as those rewards are unevenly distributed in the world of sumo. As we said earlier, it looked like Tenta could have been an all-timer if he'd stuck it out, but it was no foregone conclusion. He was quoted as saying, "Nothing I have ever done, not football, not college wrestling, compares with the kind of physical abuse you inflict on your body in sumo." If he'd kept going, he'd also have had to remove the tiger tattoo on his arm. For John Tenta, this was an affectionate reference to his alma mater of Louisiana State, but in Japan, tattoos were associated with criminality and are frowned upon even to this day. Back then, tattoo removal was in the Stone Age compared to today, and removal of the large piece would have required a 6-week recovery time, where young Rikishi can barely expect 6 hours to themselves. Getting out of the sumo world was trickier than you might expect. He essentially had to lie and sneak away from his stable, and then hide in a hotel room for 2 weeks until he could negotiate his release. They had good reason to not let him go, as the Canadian Comet had become quite the cash cow for his stable. He had become an enormous star in that world in short order, and as you might expect, there were gambling concerns at stake. He himself might never see much of that revenue, but the fact remained. On his enormous back, his stable was making money hand over fist. Only 1 year after leaving sumo, he was back in Japan, in Giant Baba's All Japan Pro Wrestling. 2 years after that, he was in the World Wrestling Federation, setting the wrestling world on notice when he destroyed the Ultimate Warrior on his first official day in the company. In 1991, Tenta was 2 years into his WWF career, and his sumo career came back to haunt him. The World Wrestling Federation promoted a series of super shows in Japan, with Genichiro Tenryu's Super World of Sports. Earthquake was booked to wrestle Koji Katao, a fellow ex-sumo wrestler and in fact an ex-Yokozuna. He is one of the other 78. Katao was a controversial figure. He had been expelled from sumo, forced to retire after a terrible argument with his stable boss in spite of his status as a Yokozuna. These two men were booked to wrestle each other. Tenta was a lower-level foreign Rikishi who attained great popularity and fame in spite of not going into the higher ranks. And Katao was an ex-Yokozuna who had been forced out of his sport of choice, and Tenta was booked to win their wrestling matches. You can probably see where this is going. It starts out looking like a pro wrestling match, but a few minutes in, Katao begins trying to shoot on Tenta. It seems as if Tenta believes that Katao is just working a little bit stiff at first, but he figures it out quickly and realizes that he is in a very different kind of fight. He shouts at Koji Katao that this is wrestling, perhaps to remind him of why they are there. Katao tries to legitimately eye gouge Tenta, and incredibly, the Japanese crowd begins chanting for the foreigner, Big John Tenta. This is some truly wild footage, and I will link it in the description here so you can see it for yourself. Koji Katao tries to bully John Tenta and completely fails. He was as big and strong as Tenta, one of the few people who can say that, and a much more experienced sumo. Would go on to fight in the early UFC, in fact, and he essentially tried to cheap shot Tenta by springing a shoot fight on him, and Tenta just flat out would not back down. Katao would end up kicking the referee, getting himself disqualified, and then he would grab a mic and start screaming about how wrestling was fake and Tenta could never really beat him. The conspiratorial part of my brain, that part present in the mind of every wrestling fan who lived through late 90s WCW, wonders if this was a work or agreed upon beforehand. MMA took off shortly after this in Japan and America, and Japan had dabbled in shoot wrestling before this. But in the end, I don't think so. Tenta looks legitimately shocked and angry at Katao's conduct. In any event, it's probably safe to assume that if John Tenta had stuck with sumo, the sky was the limit for him. His cultural impact in Japan was impressive. In spite of the sumo media's attempt to denigrate and slander him after he left the sport, his popularity in the country remained sky high. But don't take my word for it. Take the word of this wonderful Japanese ska band who call themselves Big John Tenta. This is probably well known in wrestling circles, especially after the Dark Side of the Ring episode, but just in case this video is the first time you've ever heard of him, John Tenta was by all accounts one of the kindest people that you could ever meet. He couldn't have been any further from the monster of his early WWF career. While he was at LSU, he came upon a group of white students threatening and bullying a black student. Tenta told the group that if they wanted to fight the black kid, they could fight him first. In spite of their numbers advantage, they backed down. John Tenta was that dude. He was him. Because the world is not fair and horrible things happen to good people, John Tenta passed away from bladder cancer in 2006 at the far too young age of 42. This has been Duality. I am the world-renowned historian. Thank you for watching. Be good, kiddos. Peace out.